Cyrus, great to meet you.
Great to meet you, Joy.
Welcome. This is beyond fantastical, isn't it, in a way? This whole once upon a time in Shaolin, the untold story of Wu-Tang Clan's $1 million secret album, the devaluation of music, and America's new public enemy #1. I mean, it sounds like that sounds like a film series, sequel, prequel. How on earth did you get involved with this book and project?
Weirdly enough, the guy who came up with the idea, this guy called Silver Rings, lives in Marrakesh, and I met him at a lunch party in 2007. And we were sort of introduced by somebody who kind of like said, I'll meet this other person in the music business. You kind of think, oh my God, who's this going to be? Somebody who plays the recorder or something. And like, it's this guy, this sort of, short sort of Moroccan guy with glasses, just sort of casually announces that he's, related, he's part of the WuTang Clan or affiliated to the WuTang Clan. And I'm sort of thinking, yeah, right, you know what I mean? It's just not possible. So I go back, I Googled him, and he was, but by the time I'd done, we got on really well. And I sort of bumped into him a couple more times. And he pictured this idea of a single copy album, and I was horrified.
And this is back in
2007.
Okay.
This is 2007. I was absolutely horrified. This went against all of my principles. I immediately saw this as kind of naked capitalism, as a kind of bling grab and that kind of thing. And I just sort of said, look, that's just hideously elitist, but I like you. Let's just leave it at that. So we didn't run into each other much over the next few years. Here and there, maybe once a year. We liked each other. And one night I get a phone call from a guy who's a really wealthy guy who I've done bits of consultancy for. He's a guy that invests in various bits and pieces. He gives me a bell and he goes, I've just invested this thing. Are you up for getting involved? And he told me these two names, Robert Diggs and Tariq Azigar. And nothing was ringing any bells. And he dropped the word Wu-Tang Clan. And it just it almost felt like a really weird twist of fate, because I'm living in the same town as the guy who came up with the idea. We'd met before. I'd thoroughly disapproved of this idea back in 2007, and here I was being invited to get involved. Me and Tariq met up. We got a little bit deeper into the concept, and between 2007 and 2013, the issues that the album was dealing with had been amplified hugely.
But just to clarify, what we're talking about here is the idea of a single album encased in silver, that will be sold for millions as if a piece of art. Yeah.
If recorded music has no intrinsic value anymore, if that is the point where we've reached.
Because of digitization.
Because of piracy. And in a way, digitization has affected every industry, from the media to books to everything. But it wasn't just piracy and digital versions. It was the fact that it was on YouTube, it was on your phone. It had this kind of ubiquity. It was just everywhere. And its value, both kind of economically and experientially, started to dissolve. And it's just like, right, well, look, if you symbolically reattach a massive price tag to one piece of recorded music, then you're making a really extreme point. And art doesn't start off in the middle ground. Art needs to start off extreme to end up in a compromise. So that was one of the key points. The second was music was gone were the days where you'd know about an album coming out, you'd be really excited with your mates, you'd rush down, you'd queue up for it at the shop, you'd get this thing in your hand, you'd go home, you'd put the record on, it would soundtrack your highs and lows for 6 months, you'd read all the sleeve notes, and then you'd put it on your wall as a sort of expression of your identity. It's art. You're surrounded by your collection, like your bookshelves. That is part of you. All of that was going. And it sort of seemed that music was becoming more of a disposable consumer product than a sort of portal into a kind of sublime realm. But the key was, as a piece of contemporary art, not just sold by an auction house, because the initial couple of auction houses we spoke to who didn't fully get what we were trying to do, they were like, well, okay, well, we could put it in a music memorabilia auction. It's like, no. This isn't going next to Elvis's last burger. Like, this is, we're trying to make a point here. This contemporary art, and at that point, their circuits just blew, and that wasn't really happening. And then we found a kind of young, iconoclastic, up-and-coming auction house. Again, a weird connection with. I've been at school with a guy who runs it. I'd never known him there, but it was just like all these weird, strange strands coming back to kind of haunt me in this project. And they totally got it. And they, even though they were young, they were really well funded. They were sort of, they were backed by Damien Hirst and Jay Joplin and that kind of thing. And they were real up and comers. And I thought it took a huge amount of courage on their part, because what you'd have thought they'd have been trying to do is reassure the rest of the art world that they're a sort of steady hand, not just go all in on this mad project that could unravel at any point. Because this was a risky one. There's no guarantee anyone would buy it. There's no guarantee there was a market for it. There's no guarantee there's a resale for it. And going into business with a Wu-Tang Clan is that's a terrifying prospect. For all they knew, we were going to sell the album and then just leak the thing, so keep the fans sweet, and you've left as the sort of heroic renegade, and no one wants to be in business with somebody that they hasn't got a track record, that they can't.
But it's something that hits me while you're talking. This really rarefied elitist world, and you've got this serious, iconic, very masculine hip hop group that that don't pull their punches, Wu-Tang Clan, and then you're sort of depositing their creativity and urban reflections in a very white, rarefied art world. How did they feel about that? Because I'm curious about that juxtaposition.
The idea of, I think some of the clan, you have to bear in mind that most of the clan were artists on this. The people who were doing this from the time the music was finished and the whole making it into a single copy album was myself, RZA, who's like the leader of the Wu-Tang Clan, and Silverings. RZA felt that this wasn't a kind of cultural compromise. He felt that this is art and it should be seen as such, and it should be up there next to that kind of thing. And he didn't have any problems with that. He was far too confident after 20 years at the top that he wasn't banging and scraping to no one. He was really confident. But we did have to manage this. So, for example, and there was another incident of this. Harvard wanted to debate the album, and that was great. But they wanted to hear some of the music. Now we were being very, very, very cagey with the music. And the one place we did agree to play it was the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the PS1, which is a really funky, it's like the Tate Modern but cool, but it's just a little bit grittier than the Tate Modern kind of thing, but it's that fit. The Harvard thing, it was like we were sort of asking ourselves, look, if you played it there, kind of students and faculty, what message is that sending? Yes, it's a symbol of the history of ideas in America, but equally it's a symbol of privilege and elitism. How can you? It's one thing to play it in the Museum of Modern Art and have free tickets on a radio giveaway, as well as the press that are going out to people who are listening to that hip hop show in New York and who are from Queens and from the Bronx. That balances that out. Harvard, without actual Wu-Tang fans being allowed in, that was all too blazing privilege. So we were aware of that symbolism, and it was a balancing act. Yeah.
Now, bearing in mind the role of RZA, the balancing act, this world of elite world that the album was floating around in, it's then bought by Martin Shkreli. Now, the very things that you wanted to avoid, and you have someone who is the scourge of, how can I put it, capitalism in terms of, reselling much needed drugs to people at exorbitant rates. I don't want to go too much. I mean, it's public knowledge about his approach to business and humanity. But the fact that couldn't have been the worst scenario for you, could it? It
was really weird. I mean, what happened was it's just a point I just cannot make strongly enough. He wasn't that guy when we did the deal with him. Right, so we basically there was
Trump wasn't that guy.
No.
Before he started to run
Trump,
president.
But Martin Shkreli was a short Wikipedia entry before that. Trump, you had years of form and magazine interviews. No, I mean he was pretty much unheard of, right? And so we'd kind of got there was sort of four fairly elite. And
what year are we now?
2015.
Right,
we're in 2015. So the exhibition at
8 years in Genesis, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in 2015. We've done the kind of launch at PS1. All the press have come in. The critics, put their seal to it. It's got momentum. And then some guys came to them. What was really interesting is you had billionaires who were nervous about buying the album because they didn't want to look like an entitled prick. That they were the ones aware of that. They were like, I don't want to look like the brash rich kid. How can we do something public spirited with it? And then this is the point at which I start finding out that Ivy League universities all have hip hop archives like Cornell and Harvard. Which I didn't know how to feel about that. On the one hand, it feels like a strange juxtaposition. On the other hand, fair play. Maybe hip hop is taken seriously as art. If those things are already springing up. So this young, quiet guy comes to the table. We get a call from the auction house going, look, he's a bit low profile. We're not even sure if he can afford it. You know, we don't know much about this guy. I Googled him. Yeah, there's a couple of lawsuits, a couple of investigations, but quite frankly, in America, in that kind of litigious society, that isn't necessarily an indicator of, you know, extreme moral problems. You know, that could just be par for the course. So he comes on and RZA meets him in New York. And Martin Shkreli turns up, really quite wide-eyed and bright, you know, bright eyes, quite very admiring of RZA at the time. And he talked an awfully good game about how he wanted this album to inspire him, this, that, the other. And he wasn't as complicated as the other guys. The other guys all wanted us to, you know, there was a sense that they wanted us to help manage what they were going to do with it afterwards, to help manage their image in a time. When this guy was just going, look, I just really want this album. I really want to listen to it and do really cool things. It's like, and RZA, you know, it's like, yeah. And RZA liked his immigrant backstory. He liked the idea that it wasn't privileged, that it was a self-made man.
Yeah.
Dragged Albanian immigrant, dragged himself up by you know, from the streets. His mother was a cleaner. Like, he liked that. So we're going through this extended legal process as we figure out how the hell you even sell a single copy album. You know, because the key issue is, I say I've got a single copy album, right? You know, if you're going to pay me a load of money, you need proof, or at least you need recourse. So if I sell it to you, take your cash, then leak it and go ha ha ha, you need to be able to sue me, but I can't let you sue me. Because what if you get bored of it? Listen, you're trying to work out all these images, all these things. And literally we were doing the legal stuff ourselves, because it wasn't something that it existed in any kind of existing codification. It was the art of the possible. But halfway through his process, he mentioned something casually about buying a company. Right, didn't think much of it. 3rd or 4th of September, contract signed, 50% paid. 2 weeks later, I'm just in my flat in Marrakesh, cruising Facebook, sunny day, everyone's chilled out, riding on high, the album's all good, and there's just this cascade of outrage. There's just literally, I mean, all my friends are just, and I keep posting and sharing this thing, and it's like, I just see hedge fund, pharmaceutical, 5,000, I'm going, it can't be. Fuck, I'm sorry, it is. At this point, I just went absolute complete kind of PR crisis meltdown. It was like, oh my god, it's the poster boy for the evils of capitalism.
Yes, so just in brief, if you could just say, for those who don't know what we're talking about and what you're talking about in terms of Shkreli and why this was such a catastrophe for... It was
such a catastrophe because, funnily enough, I mean, the pharmaceutical industry in America have a habit of taking old drugs whose patents are sort of, you know, close to expiring, buying them up, repackaging them, jacking the price on them hugely. Okay, now he had done this. This had been the company he bought. So he had bought this pill called Daraprim, which is talked about a lot as an AIDS drug. It's actually an autoimmune drug. So if you've got Lyme disease, anything that affects your autoimmune system, it deals with toxoplasmosis. So this had gone up in price 5,000%. Now, instead of doing what most pharmaceutical companies do, which is issue a kind of bland statement from, you know, the company, he just went out on every TV program that would have it in the space of the day, doing on a sort of one-man crusade to identify himself personally with this kind of act of, you know, naked, you know, renegade capitalism. Finally, the story broke, and of course, it was perceived as an absolute disaster in a way that, like, you know, well, of course, who's going to buy an album for millions, you know, except somebody like this? Now, in the cold light of day, you kind of think to yourself, well, actually, if it had been bought by a more traditional elite, like the type you were referring to, would that have been worse? If it just disappeared into, you know, William Ambrose, Samuel Partridge III's basement, and, you know, was occasionally brought out for his friends at, you know, in the Hamptons now and again, for some reason that actually, and I don't know if I'm just trying to, you know, make myself feel that, I think that would have been worse in some ways in retrospect, because that really is it becoming a sort of toy of a very established elite. I think with him, he kept the debate going. He certainly kept the drama going. And I think that there was actually a lot to be said about the idea, because the genesis of this whole project was we as a community aren't supporting music. The economics are gone. People need other revenue streams. Why? Because you're not paying a fiver, right? You, and you, right? The same people who are giving us a moral lecture this far down the line. So what happens? Bigger artists make music. Recorded music's a lost leader. It's used to sell tours, merchandise, licensing. That's what it is. Now, if you're an independent guy and you sell 3,000 copies of CD to stop you getting a job in Starbucks, it's not just you taking that off Pirate Bay. There are consequences. And if you want to continue to have access to cool, independent music that someone has spent a couple of years really thinking, putting their heart and soul into, then, you just can't take that for granted. And that's what society had done. And so him coming along as the villain of the piece, I think there's a lot to be said for that.
But I just want to sort of end really thinking about where you are at with this book. So I know you're off to Amsterdam, and what the response has been in the UK to this so far.
Oh, it's literally just come out this week. So I've had a really positive response so far. I wrote this book. I wrote this book at the time. I wrote it very, very quickly, and I wrote it in quite an impact. So some of it's quite raw. It's not a journalistic book. It is not. It is an absolute view from the bunker. It's the highs and lows, and how we felt, our own contradictions with the ideas, because the idea kept shifting. They kept throwing up new paradoxes and new contradictions.
In this context is you,
Rizzo and Silvery. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because then imagine you've been on this intense journey together. And I'm amazed, bearing in mind what you've said so far. The book isn't bigger. What impact do you want? What are you saying with this book in brief? What are you saying?
I want this to be a philosophical caper. That's what I want. I want it to be a fun, rollicking, because it is partly a caper. It is partly just a ridiculous adventure. But at the same time, it's underpinned by very serious cultural and philosophical points.
Cyrus, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Joy. Thanks so much. Thank you.